The Hampshire Historical Society and the Hampshire Sons of the American Revolution to commemorate what took place 250 years ago today over in Exeter, where New Hampshire became the first colony at the time to really declare our independence and adopt our first constitution. Forward march!
Combat march! March time, march! Forward, halt! To left base! Present arms!
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to
Time, march! Forward, march!
A journal of the House of Representatives of the colony of New Hampshire, who convened at Exeter as delegates from the several towns, parishes, and places in said colony on the 21st day of December, Anno Domini 1775, and continued a Congress until the 5th day of January, Anno Domini 1776, and then, by leave of the Honorable the Continental Congress, resolved themselves into a House of Representatives or Assembly for the colony of New Hampshire in Congress Friday, November 3rd, 1775. The Congress, taking into consideration the report of the Committee on the New Hampshire Instructions, resolved that it be recommended to the Provincial Convention of New Hampshire to call a full and free representation of the people, and that the representatives, if they think it necessary, establish such a form of government as in their judgment will best produce the happiness of the people and most effectual secure peace and good order in the province during the continuance of the present dispute between Great Britain and the colonies. Extract from the minutes of Charles Thompson, Secretary, by order of Congress, John Hancock, President. A true copy. Attention, Noah Emery, Deputy Secretary. In Congress at Exeter, January 5th, 1776. Voted that this Congress take up civil government for this colony in manner and form following these: we, the members of the Congress of New Hampshire, chosen and appointed by the free suffrages of the people of said colony, and authorized and empowered by them to meet together and use such means and pursue such measures as we should judge best for the public good, and in particular to establish some form of government, provided that measure should be recommended by the Continental Congress, and a recommendation to that purpose having been transmitted to us from the said Congress, have taken into our serious consideration the unhappy circumstances to which this colony is involved by means of many, many grievous and oppressive acts of the British Parliament, depriving us of our natural and constitutional rights and privileges, to enforce obedience to which acts a powerful fleet and army have been sent into this country by the Ministry of Great Britain, who have exercised a wanton and cruel abuse of their power in destroying the lives and properties of the colonists in many places with fire and sword, taking the ships and lading many of the honest and industrious inhabitants of this colony employed in commerce, agreeable to the laws and customs a long time used here. The sudden, abrupt departure of His Excellency John Wentworth, Esquire, our late governor, and several of the council, leaving us destitute of legislation, and no executive courts being open to punish criminal offenders, whereby the lives and properties of the honest people of this colony are liable to the machinations and evil designs of wicked men. Therefore, the preservation of peace and good order, and for the security of the lives and properties of the inhabitants of this colony, we conceive ourselves reduced to the necessity of establishing a form of government to continue during the present unhappy and unnatural contest with Great Britain, protesting and declaring that we never sought to throw off our dependence upon Great Britain, but felt ourselves happy under her protection while we could enjoy our constitutional rights and privileges, and that we shall rejoice if such a reconciliation between us and our parent state can be effected as shall be approved by the Continental Congress, in whose prudence and wisdom we confide. Accordingly, pursuant to the trust reposed in us, we do resolve that this Congress assume the name, power, and authority of a House of Representatives or Assembly for the colony of New Hampshire, and that said House then proceed to choose 12 persons, being reputable freeholders and inhabitants within this colony in the following manner. These: 5 in the county of Rockingham, 2 in the county of Stratford, 2 in the county of Hillsborough, 2 in the county of Cheshire, and 1 in the county of Grafton, to be a distinct and separate branch of the legislature by the name of a council for this colony, to continue as such until the 3rd Wednesday in December next, any 7 of whom to be a quorum to do business. That such council appoint their president, and in his absence that the senior councilor preside. That a secretary be appointed by both branches, who may be a councilor or otherwise as they shall choose. That no act or resolve shall be valid and put into execution unless agreed to and passed by both branches of the legislature. That all public officers for the said colony in each county for the current year be appointed by the council and assembly, except the several clerks of the executive courts, who shall be appointed by the justices of the respective courts. That all bills, resolves, or votes for raising, levying, and collecting money originate in the House of Representatives, that at any session of the council and assembly, neither branch shall adjourn for any longer time, that from Saturday till the next Monday, without consent of the other. And it is further resolved that if the present unhappy dispute with Great Britain should continue longer than this present year, and the Continental Congress give no instruction or direction to the contrary, the council be chosen by the people of each respective county in such manner as the council and House of Representatives shall order. The general and field officers of the militia on any vacancy be appointed by the 2 houses, and all inferior officers be chosen by the respective companies. That all officers of the army be appointed by the 2 houses, except they should direct otherwise in case of any emergency. That all civil officers for the colony and for each county be appointed, and the time of their continuance in office be determined by the 2 houses, except clerks of courts, county treasurers, and recorders of deeds. That a treasurer and a recorder of deeds for each county be annually chosen by the people of each county respectively. The votes for such officers to be returned to the respective courts of general sessions of the peace in the county there to be. Ascertained as the council and assembly shall hereafter direct, that precepts in the name of the Council and Assembly, signed by the President of the Council and Speaker of the House of Representatives, shall issue annually at or before the 1st of November for the choice of a Council and House of Representatives to be returned by the 3rd Wednesday in December, then next ensuing, in such manner as the Council and Assembly shall hereafter prescribe.
Well, I would try not to use the microphone if I can get out of it, but I don't have the greatest voice anymore, so if you can't hear, yell. In a recent column in the newspaper, columnist George Will made the following statement. No event benefited the world more than the Revolutionary War. I agree with that statement. For all of the history that came after it, things would have been a lot different if we were still under the king today. This was an ideological war, very different from previous wars, where the objective was control and territory. This was an ideological war because we felt that our rights had in fact been infringed. It was, in all cases, a civil war, and civil wars are particularly nasty. Made even more difficult by sort of the rule of threes. A third of the country was in favor of breaking from Britain. A third of the country wished to remain loyal, and the other third said, "A pox on both your houses, leave us alone." The northern part of our state was particularly Tory. The towns were Tory, the militias were Tory. And they weren't initially included in a lot of things, particularly as we started to establish the government. Now, New Hampshire leads, particularly in these early events, and we should recognize the important role that New Hampshire played in the beginning of the American Revolution. Over the period of the Revolution, as many as 250,000 men and some women served, and 80 to 90,000 served in the Continental Army. Now, New Hampshire, we don't know. The estimates are all over the place. The records were not good. There's a list that the state has, but that's only what was reported to the state. I know for a fact that some folks were not included on that. We think maybe 10 to 15,000, and 3,000 served as privateers. Many people don't realize that. We had a lot of privateers going out of Portsmouth. All altruistic, didn't expect any reward, but they were acting as privateers. Civilian support was critical throughout the war, throughout the entire 13 colonies. Never forget that the army had to be fed, the army had to be supplied, the army had to be supported, we had spies, etc. All of that occurred in every single colony, in addition to New Hampshire. Over that war, about 7,000 were killed in the army, and about 17,000 wounded, and twice that number died of disease. So, let's start with the most important beginning, one that we just celebrated, the powder raids on Fort William and Mary. Anybody here have an ancestor that was at Fort William and Mary? Oh, guess I'm the only one. So, it wasn't initially an ideological problem. There wasn't an intent to break from Great Britain, but the powder was ours, and somebody else was going to take it. We charged duty for every ship, foreign ship, coming into Portsmouth. And with that duty, we bought the powder. And we were considering taking it from all these foreigners, like them nutmeggers from Connecticut, them New Jersey people, and forbid the Canadians. Everybody paid. So when it became clear that General Gage was going to possibly seize this powder, that was the impetus for the first raid. Raid was successful. There were no real casualties on that raid. But then the general fervor, which is true of all mass movements, and remember there's no militia in Portsmouth, so this is the general public, the citizens, decided, well, maybe we ought to take some more material that might be useful to us. And they went back and took 16 cannons, which were broad arrow marked and were treason. Now, we believe as many as 1,000 people were involved at some point all along these 2 days. But we don't know more than 150 because there is no sign-up sheet for committing treason. And not everybody wanted to know. Nobody knew how it was going to come out. So this was the first overt act of treason. And hauling down the king's colors, that was a treasonable offense for everybody involved. And that was agreed to by the leadership in the Mass Bay colony and Governor Wentworth, whom nobody listened to. One important feature is this was the first time military changed hands. The quick reaction force for the governor was the Exeter militia. Best equipped, best trained, best manned, changed sides. At that point, the governor lost control of the military in the colony, and the government subsequently fell. And this is made us the first colony in the entire country to achieve our independence. And that becomes important later. Now, Lexington and Concord occurred. After Lexington and Concord, the interim leadership out of Exeter gave permission, the direction for forming 3 regiments. One regiment was led by General Stark, whom we're most familiar with, the 1st New Hampshire Regiment. These regiments then prepared to support resistance to the British. Now, they didn't get down to Lexington and Concord in time to really do anything, but they did muster at Medford. And so they occupied Medford for a while, and then the decision is made to fortify the outskirts of Boston, specifically Bunker Hill. Now, Bunker Hill, there were 2 hills, Breed's Hill and Bunker Hill. They, not the New Hampshire troops, fortified the wrong hill. They fortified Breed's Hill. They also didn't extend the fortifications, which would have been fatal. The British, when they landed on the peninsula, were ready to send a regiment up the beach and turn the left flank, and that would have been a quick and easy massacre. Once General Stark and the New Hampshire troops arrived, and New Hampshire troops were the largest number of troops at Bunker Hill, General Stark, having extended military experience from the French and Indian War, extended the fortifications down to the beach. He set out aiming stakes to control fire because they knew they were short of powder. Nobody gives them credit for that. A lot of that work is assigned to other members of the defense force up in the redoubt. But New Hampshire troops still did that. Had better fire control, and fire control matters, particularly if you're short of ammunition. There's a historic mistake where people say, well, all of the powder from Fort William and Mary was trucked down to Bunker Hill. That is an error. There's no proof of that. We know that some obviously went down with the New Hampshire folks. But remember, all these colonies are essentially separate countries. They have their own culture, they have their own objective, they have their own interests, and you don't give your stuff away to the other guy. So, powder was limited, and they knew it. We had a little bit more powder, apparently, on the New Hampshire side. Now, they prevented the disaster, but they ran out of ammunition. They ran out of ammunition very suddenly. The British used tactics that they were used to using in Europe, line tactics. They thought it was going to be an easy pushover. It was not. They were defeated on 2 advances. The 3rd advance, they changed tactics. Hard to tell how successful we would have been had we had more ammunition. But they ran out of ammunition, and the British reported that the firing stopped suddenly. Just no ammunition. Now we get what the British want. The British want a direct confrontation by bayonet. because that was the British tactics. Try to disrupt the other side with fire and then finish the job with a bayonet. New Hampshire troops moved back to support a withdrawal of the militia off of Breed's Hill. And they did a great job of it. And what's very interesting is a certain guy by the name of General Burgoyne is watching this from Boston. And he makes a public statement that there was no rout, which is what the British wanted. There was no rout of the colonists, the rebels, as they call them, but an orderly military withdrawal. And that is compliment to the treasonous rebels from a general in the British Army. That's very unusual. And this is the same guy who later is the first officer in British history to surrender an entire army, which was at Saratoga. Now the next area where we see New Hampshire troops well present is Trenton. Now, you've probably recently seen the TV series on the Revolution, which is in general very good. They make one little error though. They credit George Washington's troops who crossed north of Trenton by boat as being the first into Trenton. They were incorrect. General Stark, then Colonel Stark, led his troops across the ice south of Trenton, and so the first troops into Trenton, very important battle, primarily psychological for us, and so New Hampshire troops were first on the scene, another first for New Hampshire. Now the big one, Saratoga. We knew that Burgoyne was coming down from the north, an attempt to split New England off from the rest of the colonies, and the army started to move north. Now remember, at this time, the 3 regiments that we had raised are now part of the brand new United States Army. They were included in the United States Army at its creation in the 17th of June, and actually it would be the 14th of June, and they really were able to, they didn't know they were members of the Army. The word hadn't reached them yet, but they're involved in the very first major, Bunker Hill being the very first major battle of the new Army. And they stayed in the Continental Army for the duration of the war. And we supported those 3 regiments during the whole war, which is laudable for a small state like ours. Always providing lots of men, lots of support. We did this in the War of 1812, we did this in the Civil War, we did this in the First and Second World War. New Hampshire has always stood out to contribute. When the Army moved north, General Stark resigned Colonel Stark resigned his commission from his regiment, and New Hampshire overnight raised a brand new regiment, hadn't trained together, hadn't fought together, and made General Stark a general, a brigadier general. And he took Seth Warner, who was in command of the 2nd Regiment, which had been made up of Green Mountain Boys. Seth Warner would be the guy to go to Bennington because they knew that Burgoyne was going to try to seize supplies that were supposed to be at Bennington. That army mustered at Charlestown, and walked to Bennington, which any of you who've ever been to Bennington, you know it's uphill both ways. And there were no roads. They got to Bennington and had a successful battle. This battle is very, very important in world history. What this battle does, it reduces Burgoyne's force by close to 10%. But also all the Indians decide he ain't gonna win, and they leave. That means the Indians were his reconnaissance force, as well as combatants. Now he's blind and short of people. We captured a lot of prisoners, but then we moved the New Hampshire people, the new regiment, moved up to a blocking position to prevent Burgoyne from going around the Continental Army. At the same time, New Hampshire troops are with the Continental Army at the Battle of Freeman's Farm. That's the decisive part of the Saratoga campaign. These are New Hampshire troops that are members of just the Continental Army. They're not now on the just New Hampshire force, which is that regiment, because one of General Stark's requirements was he reported only to New Hampshire, not to the Continental officers. Burgoyne surrenders. Now, why is that important? You can make a case that that surrender is one of the 12 most important battles in history. It's that surrender that convinced the French that we might have a chance. And at that point, the French came in on our side, and over the period of the next several months, sent us 100,000 French Charleville muskets, all of which came through Portsmouth. If the French had not supported us, the Spanish would not have supported us either. The Spanish did support us later, but the Spanish had had their butts kicked by the English, and they didn't want to get initially direct conflict with them, but they supplied us with a lot of material, a lot of money. Then they started fires all over the place, and that meant the British could not concentrate forces in North America. So this all paved the way for the eventual victory. 8 years, nobody expected this to last for 8 years. But we had set the army on the road, made important contributions, and we had New Hampshire troops present at the Battle of Yorktown, the large major battle in the north. We did not have any troops that went out into the true southern theater. It was all in New England and north. So this was a big feat for a small state. It showed the independence of the people in New Hampshire, who have always stepped up to support freedom. So we need to always think fondly of their sacrifices. As an aside, I participated in the ceremony commemorating the sieges of Fort William and Mary. Froze my rear end off. It was cold. It was about the same weather that my ancestor, one of the takers of the powder, had to operate in the day in 1774. These were tough folks that lived through Valley Forge, tough folks that lived through losing battle after battle in an attempt to just wear down the British. We owe a lot to these people, and we need to remember our first veterans. Thank you.